are only conventions, and it is quite as unreasonable to ask if they are true or false as to ask if the metric system is true or false. Only these conventions are convenient, and there are certain experiments which prove it to us. At the first glance the analogy is complete. The role of experiment seems the same. We shall therefore be tempted to say, either mechanics must be looked upon as experimental science, and then it should be the same with geometry, or, on the contrary, geometry is a deductive science, and then we can say the same of mechanics. Such a conclusion would be illegitimate. The experiments which have led us to adopt as more convenient the fundamental conventions of geometry refer to bodies which have nothing in common with those that are studied by geometry. They refer to the properties of solid bodies and to the propagation of light in a straight line. These are mechanical, optical experiments. In no way can they be regarded as geometrical experiments. And even the probable reason why our geometry seems convenient to us is, that our bodies, our hands, and our limbs enjoy the properties of solid bodies. Our fundamental experiments are preeminently physiological experiments, which refer, not to the space which is the object that geometry must study, but to our body, that is to say, to the instrument which we use for that study. On the other hand, the fundamental conventions of mechanics and the experiments which prove to us that they are convenient certainly refer to the same objects or to analogous objects. Conventional and general principles are the natural and direct generalizations of experimental and particular principles. Let it not be said that I am thus tracing artificial frontiers between the sciences, that I am separating by a barrier geometry properly so called from the study of solid bodies. I might just as well raise a barrier between experimental mechanics and the conventional mechanics of general principles. Who does not see, in fact, that by separating these two sciences we mutilate both, and that what will remain of the conventional mechanics when it is isolated will be but very little, and can in no way be compared with that grand body of doctrine which is called geometry? We now understand why the teaching of mechanics should remain experimental. Thus only can we be made to understand the genesis of the science, and that is indispensable for a complete knowledge of the science itself. Besides, if we study mechanics, it is in order to apply it, and we can only apply it if it remains objective. Now, as we have seen, when principles gain in generality and certainty, they lose in objectivity. It is therefore especially with the objective side of principles that we must be early familiarized, and this can only be by passing from the particular to the general, instead of from the general to the particular. Principles are conventions and definitions in disguise. They are, however, deduced from experimental laws, and these laws have, so to speak, been erected into principles to which our mind attributes an absolute value. Some philosophers have generalized far too much. They have thought that the principles were the whole of science, and therefore that the whole of science was conventional. This paradoxical doctrine, which is called nominalism, cannot stand examination. How can a law become a principle? It expressed a relation between two real terms, A and B, but it was not rigorously true, it was only approximate. We introduce arbitrarily an intermediate term C, more or less imaginary, and C is, by definition, that which has with A exactly the relation expressed by the law. So our law is decomposed into an absolute and rigorous principle which expresses the relation of A to C, and an approximate experimental and revisable law which expresses the relation of C to B. But it is clear that however far this decomposition may be carried, laws will always remain. We shall now enter into the domain of laws properly so called. End of chapter 8.